Hi, I'm Tim Henriques with the Fantasy Book Ranking System, and the books we're going to check out in this series are the Icewind Dale trilogy. This was also made into a computer game, but we have kind of the original Icewind Dale trilogy. Came out about 3 decades ago. It includes The Crystal Shard, Streams of Silver, and The Halfling's Gem, written by RA Salvatore. For those of you not familiar with the fantasy book ranking system, real quick, the basic purpose here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to compare different aspects of the book to other books. It's very difficult when you read, say, on Amazon, you read some reviews, and basically you're left with wondering, well, I don't even know if I like what you like, so how do I know if your review has value? So I'm going to compare what I think is really good, and then you can make up your own mind. So the goal is really to help the reader, you, decide if this is worth your time, if it's something that you want to read. Also, just being a little selfish, I'm kind of an aspiring author myself. I've written 2 nonfiction books, but I'm trying to dip my toe into the fantasy world, and so I'm doing this to help see what the fantasy masters do that's good, maybe what people could do that could be even better, to try to help myself out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 15 different categories, and we're going to rank them on a 1 to 10 scale for the most part, 10 being super awesome and pretty rare, 8 is like decent, and 6 kind of sucks. And we'll go through. Honestly, most of the reviews I'll do will tend to be on the better side because I pre-screen most books. I don't have enough time to read a bunch of crap, so I at least see what most people like and then see what we got going on. I'll also simply describe some other elements of the story, and then I'm going to give you some flaws, strengths, overall impression, and ultimately we'll give that book its own unique FaBR score. So how epic is this story? First, I should mention that I am basing this review. I have not read these books in a while, so I read these in my teens. I have since looked through some, and I've read some of the offshoots books as well, but it has been a little while since I sat down and read it. But overall, epicness, pretty cool, broad, reasonably broad, sweeping story, not quite up on like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones scale, but an 8, so solid, didn't take away from the story, wasn't something you super remember about it in my mind. How well written is it? Again, pretty solid 8, so it's definitely an easy read. You kind of go through it, you tend to enjoy it. I don't think you're blown away by the writing ability, but it also is not a
distraction. Name of the Wind would be a 10 in that category. How real did it feel? To me, this is fantasy, especially fantasies coming out, in 30-ish years ago. I don't think the goal was really to make it feel real, so you kind of felt like you were watching a movie unfold in front of you, but as a book, and so I would give it a 7.5. If you really like the real feel, you can take it off. To me, it's not a big negative, but it's not super real feeling. First Law trilogy would be a 10 in that category. What lessons are taught? I think Salvatore is trying to teach some lessons to his readers as he goes through. None of them, stuck with me super long. But again, in fairness, I could read the book again at a little bit more recent date to stay as up to date with that. But give that an 8. Is the book a page turner? Yeah, he does a good job of kind of, he strings you along with the story, what's going to happen, who's going to do this, and so, where are we at? So definitely it's something that usually once you get into it, you're probably going to want to finish. So 8.5 on that. Something like a Da Vinci Code or Maltese Falcon would be a 10. How memorable is the story itself? Again, after all this time, certainly have some detail, but the story is not what really stands out in this. The land was cool, and as we'll get to, the main character is pretty cool, but the story, that's not a super strong ranking, so like a 10, something like Star Wars is a super memorable story. How memorable are the main characters? Here we're going to get the highest mark, so this guy, so he basically created this new character, Dritz Dowerden, or however exactly you say it, the drow elf that has kind of the kind heart and the double scimitars and the Black Panther. And he's then gone on to spawn literally 20 plus books all about the same main character. So for those of you, if you kind of like that idea, oh wow, there's like a cool drow and it's a new world, and if you like this guy, then you can just read a whole bunch of books about him, and many people have. So that would certainly say that's this book's #1 draw, is the creation of this pretty cool and interesting character. He's not that dynamic, but he's a pretty cool character. Secondary characters are also reasonably cool. You got the barbarian who's out there. There's a dwarf involved, so it's fun, cool, classic Dungeons and Dragons fantasy style characters. So the characters are memorable. The land is memorable. I don't see this exact story or the lessons taught as super memorable. You want to read the next book. He makes you want to find out what you got going on. So you finish that first one and you're curious, hey, what's going to happen with the whole story? It is not like a complete story that then you want to finish. So you do want to kind of read all of them. And again, actually, he wrote these books, then he went and wrote a prequel, and then he wrote a whole bunch of books after that. So there is a massive series that this can go in. But you can certainly read these as standalone, and you get a pretty good idea of the story. You don't have to read the first ones if you don't want to. How rereadable is it? It's going to score a little less. It's written a little bit more for that younger audience, kind of similar to Dragonlance, but this also is set in the Forgotten Realms part of Dungeons & Dragons, another pretty popular land. So I'd give this a 7.5. It's definitely not a strength. As you get older, I think you probably get a little less excited about it. How clear is a good and evil? Very clear, right? So to me, there's no ambiguity about what's going on and what people should do, at least for the most part. So yeah, this would get very clear. Something like Star Wars 4, 5, 6 would also get the same ranking. Magic in Dungeons and Dragons, generally, there's certainly magic about. Not everybody has it, but it's definitely out there with magic creatures and magic items. And then the main character, moderate or even a little higher. So the main character's using some magic with some frequency, or has magic weapons, for example, with some frequency. So moderate for both of those. You can read this pretty young. This is not a hardcore story. It's not a Game of Thrones mature style. So I'd be happy to read this to my kids if they were interested. 8+ for me is fine. Is the series finished? Yes, it was written quite a long time ago. It's since spawned a whole bunch, but yes, the series is finished. You can pick them up now and go all the way through and not have to wait, which is a pretty big bonus. So the flaws I'd say this book's written more for younger readers, so for those teens out there, probably not going to be as picky about the writing style, probably really going to enjoy it. I know when I read it, I definitely enjoyed it, thought it was pretty awesome, was eager to play the video games and things like that associated in that land. But when you reread as an adult, especially after having been exposed to Game of Thrones and First Law and things like that, it's not quite up to that level. The story itself, I don't remember the story that well, but I do remember the characters very well. It is very D&D based. It brought into the world the most super memorable character. You got Bruner Battlehammer and Wolfgar are super memorable too, or very memorable. The story itself, not so much. Definitely a little more for younger readers. Again, very on par with Dragonlance. Probably not ideal for an adult who wants serious fantasy first time around. So what would I give this? I'd give this an overall 80. Okay, so again, a younger reader might bump that up a little bit more, high 80s. Real discerning, kind of uppity fantasy adult reader might give it a little less. It's a good classic story, cool character that's very memorable. Story itself, c'est la vie. Pretty dedicated to Dungeons and Dragons, though. So if you like that, which I do, that's going to give it a little higher marks. But I would give the Icewind Dale series an 80. Thanks a lot.